Well, good evening, everybody. It is the Wednesday, the 27th of June, and I thought I'd just weigh in with my thoughts on an issue that more for an issue for sort of politicos and policy wonks and all this sort of thing, but it's the issue of the reforms for the House of Lords, which the Deputy Prime Minister and the Coalition are putting forward this week and are now, in the process of being debated. And I will start off by laying out my case very simply and strongly. I am totally and utterly against the reforms as they currently stand. I think they are utterly pointless. I don't think they're going to achieve anything of note, anything usual, or anything useful, I should say, and I think they're a total waste of time and a total waste of money. That being said, I'm not against reform of the House of Lords. It is too big at 800. I would be quite happy to have it cut down to 450 or whatever. Let's say with 20 left aside for Lord Spiritual, so you would have 12 Christian bishops, and then you would also maybe have the space for chief rabbis, imams, etc. Then a number of people from, and then actually I would then have the rest of it, the whole of the rest of it. I wouldn't have any party political peers whatsoever. What I would have is I would have a situation where each of the different types of business in the UK, or whether you're or the sciences or art and culture or whatever, get together and elect a certain number of their own members to sit in the House of Lords. So what you would end up with is you have a party political chamber like the House of Commons, which has primacy, and then you have a deliberative, non-party political second chamber. Now that to me would make perfect sense. I don't have a problem with the idea of 15-year terms. I say that. Why does it need to be 15 years? Why couldn't it be 5? Why have these enormous long terms unless you're just trying to stuff it with failed ex-ministers who've just come out of government, and you've got to have someone to put them out to pasture. But I just don't see the point, to be honest. As long as the Parliament Act exists, as long as the House of Commons has the ability to force a bill through the Lords, in a sense, what are you going to achieve by making the House of Lords democratically elected? And to some people who will say, oh, but it's not elected, therefore it lacks its legitimacy. Well, would you say that about a High Court judge? Would you say that about the head of the armed forces? Would you say that about the head of the civil service? They all have very, very important roles to play in relation to the Constitution, etc. of the United Kingdom. But they're not democratically elected, are they? I always remember that wonderful quote by Margaret Thatcher where she said that referenda were the tools of dictators and demagogues. And I rather think about the same about people who constantly go on about the need for greater and greater democracy in systems that are working perfectly well. Let's be honest, the people who want a democratic elected House of Lords, and particularly on STV, which I hate, they are people like Lib Dems, like UKIP, etc., because they reckon that with STV they'll probably get more members, and they'll actually start getting more members of their party into the House of Commons. The Greens, etc. I'm sure the SDLP, Plaid Cymru, all these others will be quite in favour of it because they're STV. Everyone gets a share, including, of course, people like the BNP. So STV, great. It's ironic, of course, that this is not being put to a referendum. We know why, because the last time a Liberal Democrat wet dream was put to the people of the United Kingdom, they tossed it out. That was a joke. That wasn't meant to be a joke. But I think all of the arguments that I've so far heard just don't hold any water with me, because it would make sense if the Lords had the ability to actually inhibit Parliament, but they don't, and we don't want that. I do not want a situation as you have in the United States where you effectively have a Senate and a House of Congress fighting with each other and preventing legislation going through. That's just not conducive to democracy. The point of an elected second chamber, the point of a second chamber, in my view, is to provide a much calmer environment to scrutinise primary legislation by people who have expertise, and that might mean that they are a little bit older. Let's be blunt. And they're not some 25-year-old who frankly knows nothing about anything. They may be a 70-year-old former Queen's Counsel who actually knows what they're talking about in these areas. Goodness forbid that old people might actually know what they're doing. I know, weird, eh? There's that wonderful phrase said to a teenager, go out and conquer the world, and rule the world whilst you still know everything. But yeah, nothing I have seen so far in this debate has led me to, in any way, to think that the reform of the House of Lords is a good idea. Like I said, I don't like the idea that we are sort of that by having elected and basically having yet another load of Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat jobsworths for 15 years on the public purse, just poncing around in the upper house. I mean, what good are they going to do, and who actually wants that? Here's the other point: who actually wants it? No one does. No one actually cares in the country. This is not an issue that we particularly care about. It's an issue for sort of policy wonks and people who sit around having debates about political theory. I mean, they're the people who care. We don't. And I do think at a time when we've got other problems, big problems, it's not really the thing we should be focusing on. I think it is a pet wet dream for policy wonks that inhabit the corners of Whitehall. So I wouldn't do it. And I think the Parliament Act, particularly, as I said, is the thing that for me really puts the nail in the coffin of it, which is the fact that 1911 established by statute that Commons would always be able to get its law through, and that government would never be held to ransom by the Lords. Again, building on the principle of the primacy of Parliament, the English Civil War, etc., etc., etc. I just don't see the point of this. The only people I can see who are in favour of it are the Lib Dems, UKIP, etc. Why? With STV, they'll probably get some members of the New Lords. So, great, we're remaking a system that works perfectly well, and has worked perfectly well for hundreds of years, because a couple of minor parties want a bit of political advantage. It's pathetic, and I really hope it gets struck down. And DC is not endearing himself to his core vote or his party at the moment. There have been a lot of issues recently where you suddenly think, are you actually talking to your party? I know he's the Prime Minister, I know he needs to speak to the country at large, but his line on the EU, his line on, for example, gay marriage, his line now on Lords reform, there are a lot of things that he's putting out which actually don't have public backing, don't have huge amounts of support within the country. But he has decided, for reasons best known to himself, that there's huge advantage to be made in pushing them. And you're like, why? What are you doing? You're not helping matters. And this is not a priority for people. The priority for people is economic growth. It's jobs. That's what the government should be focusing on. Not messing around with some, political nutjob's desire to change the Lords just so his, party get a few more people. And that's not a good way of running a democracy. And again, all the old arguments of we should have a written constitution have come up. No, we shouldn't. No, we shouldn't. We haven't needed it. We invented, well, okay, fine, we didn't invent democracy, the Greeks did, but we invented constitutional parliamentary systems. We've had it for hundreds of years. It works perfectly well. We don't actually need to change it. This is a waste of money, and I really hope that they shoot it down. Cheers.